Welcome back to episode 4 of BrainWise, Our Lives Decoded, where we are going to wrap up our conversation on the 5 non-conscious dynamics of the brain, where we're going to cover stress, change, and rhythms. I am Cole Bastian, your host, and I'm joined by my co-host, Phil Dixon. So, Phil, how have you been since the last time we chatted?
It's been a wild and very wet week. And I love the alliteration there. But yeah, it's been fun. I got news this morning that our kitchen remodel is hung up on a couple of things. And that was an interesting experience that I noticed. Anyway, so I got that as bad news and I noticed what was going on in my brain, which was, oh my
What was
God.
going on?
It's, oh my God, if that hasn't passed test and that hasn't passed test, that means that we can't start this. And I invented a story that was going to happen in my brain in the space of milliseconds. And one of the things the brain is good is what we call MSU. And if we don't have information, we make stuff up. And you can use whatever you want in the S there.
Yeah. I might use a more colorful language there.
Exactly. And so I found myself making that, using MSU and inventing all this stuff. And the contractor's standing right opposite me. And so I'm getting a little stressed because I know that that's going to have all sorts of impact. But I also know that he is incredibly stressed at the moment. And I caught myself going, what's the best thing I can do for not just me, for both of us? And so I deflected it to a point of humor and chose to joke about it. And that took out the angst from both of us. So that was and that's part of what we were talking about the other day is, can you catch yourself? And that, because all the things we're doing, brain stuff, but we want to be able to catch ourselves in the moment. And that's when I consider myself, hey, that's a success.
And was that your BrainWise moment of the week?
That was my BrainWise moment of about 2 hours ago.
Okay. I love it. Very good. So it happened here recently. So it's fresh on your mind.
Right.
I'm sorry that the kitchen remodel is delayed a little bit. It seems that those construction projects always seem to have some kind of complication. I haven't heard of anyone that has gone off without a hitch, and that just has been a seamless experience from start to finish, unfortunately. I don't know exactly what it is that just seems to always get in the way, but hopefully this will be the only road bump along the journey for you and Kathy.
Yeah. I think it all comes down to what in England we would call Sod's Law, which means basically if something can go wrong, it will. So in practice, it is described as if you drop a slice of buttered toast, it will always fall buttered side down, except when you're trying to illustrate the law.
Exactly. It's like the other day we were celebrating my mom's birthday and I dropped something on the ground and it dropped frosting side down instead of the other side down.
Yeah, it always...
But if I tried to do it intentionally, probably would not have done that.
That's exactly right.
As you can see, Joey and I are back home in Georgia. We had a great time visiting our family in Kansas City, Missouri area, celebrating my mom's birthday. So it was such a delight. We actually had a really fun time. It was Joey's first time visiting an Amish store. There's several Amish communities in the Missouri area. And so he had not visited an Amish store, really been able to experience that community. And we went and did that on her birthday. And they've got a really cool experience where they set up their stores and their shops, and they've got bulk. They order in bulk and then they repackage it and they sell it at pretty inexpensive pricing. We went to one of their nurseries and we get to see, hopefully, their horse and buggy as they go down the road. And it's just a really interesting experience and kind of a different shift in perspective coming from the city and just seeing how different people live life. So it was really fun to do that and celebrate Mom's birthday. Is haven't been able to actually be in physical proximity with her while she has celebrated her actual birthday in quite some time, because it just never has aligned for that. So it was really nice to do and glad to be home now as life continues to life as we go along this journey. And we now have some of Joey's family in town. His niece and her mom are here. So we're excited to have them with us as we spend some time together. So it's been a really good couple of weeks just enjoying family. And so my BrainWise moment for last week is I took some time to think about it this morning as we were preparing for our podcast episode this morning. And I think that we oftentimes life just gets extremely busy and there's always we go and work especially can define the outcome and define what our schedule is going to look like and all the different things that might be happening. I certainly have made this decision, quite honestly, that when I've been on vacation, if you want to call it that, that I have chosen to allow work to overflow or infiltrate that time where I haven't really disconnected from the work experience. And so what should be time to be able to truly disconnect and enjoy family and be able to recharge my batteries turned in quickly to a mixture of work and adding additional stress versus what should have been time to recharge batteries. And as I was reflecting on the last week, I actually was able to, for the majority of the time that we were there, I disconnected entirely from my day job, which was really nice. But it doesn't mean that I'm not so committed and that I think there's all of these different emotions, Phil, that I think we probably all go through as professionals that if I don't work and I don't do this, people are going to think whatever they're going to think. One, let them think it quite honestly. But two, none of it's true. They're probably not going to think it, number one. And number two, none of it is true, even if they do, because you are able to, when you're on your vacation, your time off, to really be able to enjoy the experience of being able to disconnect, spend time with family, and really be able to let your brain have a moment to focus on what's important, which is spending time with people that we really truly care about and that care about you so that you can recharge your batteries, you can recharge their batteries, and then you can be refilled as you go back into the work week that's coming up. So that's my BrainWise moment for the week that I was thinking on this morning and really had a great time with family and ready to get back to work this week. Hard at it as we go into the rest of the week and going to take another couple of days to really spend time with our niece who's in town and recharge my batteries again before we go hard at it again over the next couple of weeks.
And I think that's a really important point, Cole, because when we give ourselves the luxury and the wonderful opportunity to take a break, a vacation, many people are still checking their emails. They're checking. And one of the things that the University of Texas discovered is if you've got this near you, it actually takes away some of your IQ because in the non-conscious brain, our non-conscious brain is constantly going, I wonder if I have an email. I wonder if I have an IM. I wonder. And it's taking cycles out of our brain. There's some people who turn around and say that can actually impact us by anywhere up to 10 to 12 points of IQ. So when you're on vacation, disconnecting not only just from physically from the rest of the world, but electronically from the rest of the world actually helps your brain out a lot.
I love it. And if I remember correctly, the IQ decrease can actually be a bit more for men than it is for females. But you actually get it back a little bit as long as once you put the phone away, then are able to, the IQ points actually come back. Is that correct?
It is. That's exactly right. So I won't repeat it. But we're trying to give people some practical application. And the practical application of that is if you're trying to think about something that's difficult for you as an individual, or you're working with a couple of other people, have everyone put their phones away. In fact, ideally, again, University of Texas discovered if you can put it in another room, it's even better still. Practical application, you're not going to die if you put your phone out somewhere else for an hour. And yet it will give you and your team or whoever you're working with an extra capacity in the brain.
Yeah, for sure. We've covered a lot already this morning in terms of practical application from BrainWise moments or BrainWise tips for our listeners this morning in terms of how we've experienced life over the last week. So let's dive in to the last segment on the 5 dynamics of the non-conscious brain, which really we're going to cover 3 in 1, which is going to be stress, change, and rhythms. Are you ready, Phil?
And you're just trying to put us under increased stress now. Is that your plan?
It is. That was my plan all along, Phil, and you just gave it away.
Oh.
Oh, just teasing. Just teasing.
All
No,
right.
not at all. Definitely don't want to put us into stress.
Okay. Ready when
All
you
right.
are.
Perfect. Phil, you said that stress gets a bad rap. I think that it probably carries a negative connotation in some ways, in some areas, and in some degree, we probably do experience stress at a higher degree. It is probably does carry some negative consequences at a higher load, but we actually need some of it to function well. Why is that? What is happening? And from your perspective, what is going on?
From what's going on in the brain is that most people have probably heard of the relationship between stress and cortisol. People have written magazine articles on cortisol is the stress hormone, etc. And yeah, that's all true. However, if you had no stress, if you had zero cortisol in your body, you probably wouldn't be doing anything. You'd be lying there like a slug. We need cortisol to actually wake us up in the morning. And that it actually is called the cortisol awakening response. And that kicks the whole rhythm off for the day. So cortisol in and of itself is not bad. Stress in and of itself is not bad. If you look at, for example, let's take the example of a zebra on the savannah being chased by a lion. It gets stressed out and it escapes the lion, and within minutes, the cortisol level goes back down. That's called acute stress, and that's how our bodies are designed to respond to the threats immediately. What is not good is when it's actually too much for us and continuous. Those are the things that cause damage. They actually physically cause damage in the body and in the brain. Yeah, stress is not a bad thing, but we want an optimal amount of stress, not only on an ongoing basis through the day, but for any given challenge, there's an optimal amount of stress.
Okay. And so can you explain a little bit about the Goldilocks principle of stress and how too little or too much can impair performance?
That's it. For the Goldilocks needed porridge just right and the bed just right and things. For the day to go for us and for any individual task to be successful, we need just the right amount of stress. Too little, and you're not going to be performing at your best. Too much, and you're going to crater and not do your best again. So there's an optimal amount. And that optimal amount is driven by all sorts of things. It's not just, let me put my finger in the air and calculate an optimal amount of stress. Now, it doesn't work as easy as that. I'm just going to pull out one of the many lists in the book. And here's some things that talk about what influences that. And I've got a list of about 9 points here. I'll run through them pretty quickly. And that is your own skill level is relationship to that particular task, right? If your skill level is above what's necessary, you're likely to get bored. If your skill level is lower than that task requires, you're likely to get anxious. And you get stressed in either direction there. So balancing what you're trying to do to the skill level, that's really important. And it actually turns out that if your skill level is just enough for the task that's facing you, that's right, quite often when you're at your most creative. So balancing it, the Goldilocks point is really important for the function against the task. Whether the task is new to you or not. Somebody tells you to do something new, although the overall thing might be quite easy, if it's new to you, your stress level goes up. All right, now you do it 2 or 3 times, and then it's standard. And for some people, that's why we get into trouble, because we think something is simple for us. We hand it to somebody else. Although it's simple, then it might not be simple for them. And there's a phrase we use called COIC, right? Clear only if known. And once somebody knows how to do something, it's not stressful, or it might be easy for them. But if they don't know it, then the simplest of tasks can actually increase that stress level. So what about the context that you're operating in? I might have done electrical wiring in for my hobby, but now all of a sudden I'm being asked to do it for someone else in their home. My stress level is going to go up. I'm in a new context. How much control do I have over the situation? Do I have time to do it at my own leisure time, or is somebody forcing me to do it? So again, all these things combine to give us a different totality of stress, and affects our performance. Your personality. Do you take on new things very easily, or do you worry about them neurotically? Do you tend to have an anxiety trait? Do you tend to think, oh, all things tend to go wrong for me, and therefore this is going to go wrong? So all of these things add up to build a totality. Anyway, there's a few more as well, but those I want to get the point across is that we're looking for that Goldilocks moment, and there's only one person can understand what that Goldilocks moment is, and that's you.
And because it's different for each of us.
Absolutely.
It's going to be personal to the person. And there's no one can really tell us what our optimal stress level is going to be. It's something that we have to really do some self-discovery on to identify for ourselves.
Yeah. And if you increase the stress, so what actually happens is if, let's say I give you a task and I make it and I start to increase your stress level, your performance will actually go up to a certain point. Okay. Now we've got to the Goldilocks point. But when you go too much further than that, it actually plummets pretty drastically. And so you put every person you put under too much stress, they're going to at some point in time, they're going to fail because it's going to go down the other side. And that's going to depend on all sorts of things. It's actually going to depend on the rhythms that we'll be talking about in a moment. But it also can depend on the time of day you're doing something. It can depend on, especially for females, the time of the month. A level of stress which was tolerable. In fact, it was the Goldilocks moment at one point, and another point in the month might take them over the top. So 100% individual, 100% context.
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
100%.
That doesn't make sense, does it? 100% both. But anyway, new math.
New math. Well, 50-50, or depending on what's happening, certainly is. It is the individual and it is the context that they're experiencing. Very good. Phil, let's look at what happens to the brain over time when we're exposed to chronic stress, especially in work environments.
Yeah, it's not good. Let's just put it that way. Bottom line is, so without going into too much technical detail, the way that we measure the health of the neurons in the brain is they're all interconnected, and they're like ferns. If you look at a fern, there's branches and there's the length of the branches, and we measure the health of those neurons by the number of branches there are and the length of the branches. When we're under chronic stress, those two measurements tend to reduce, and in a few important areas of the brain, we start to lose the strength of those neurons under chronic stress. The only part of the brain that doesn't get affected that way is that part that is detecting stress. The opposite happens. It actually grows under stress. So the thing that's looking out and saying, should I be stressed about this, gets stronger under chronic stress. So chronic stress is bad. So what's the definition of chronic stress? That would be an interesting place to start. Typically, it's referred to it 2 weeks under chronic stress. It's different for everybody. Again, some people tolerate that stress. If you're trained as a first responder, you might be trained to live in that level of chronic stress for longer than the average person. But so it's very different for each individual. But again, it's over multiple periods of time. And that's one of the reasons why finding what stresses you as an individual can actually help you deal with it, because you're not trying to generally deal with all stresses. I'm going to deal with the one that impacts me the most. And so it's not just chronic stress is bad, but what's the chronic stress for you and how can you deal with it?
Yeah, it's interesting because I imagine that helps, or it doesn't help, but it actually probably shows up as disengagement, mental fog, burnout, probably keeps us or makes us incapable or less capable of learning or being able to reflect. And some of those things that we've been talking about in terms of how to help us become more brain wise, or the things that help us really grow as leaders. If we're under chronic stress, it becomes more difficult to do those things, is what it sounds like to me. If especially the structure of the brain, as you were describing it as a fern, is starting to change because of that stress, it sounds like we're probably in a place where we're not able to do some of those things that are more brain wise moments or tips.
Absolutely. And in fact, it's worse than that, because what actually happens when we're under stress is our viewpoint narrows. We tend to get a little bit more focused, and we tend to focus on the downside, the negatives. We tend to be less tolerant. We tend to be less able to see the bigger picture. There's all sorts of things that are concomitant with being under chronic stress.
Interesting. I've been talking to our listeners a lot about going through a very transitional period of my own professional life. And in the last several months, there's been a tremendous amount of stress. And as you're talking about it, I can actually see how a lot of those things have shown up in my professional and then my personal life. It's very difficult to, we talk a lot about how you don't want to let the two bleed over, but I think when you're under stress, it probably becomes even more difficult to not allow that to happen. In the last probably month, I have really been able to say, okay, the stress that's happening there, I just have to relinquish it and be able to move forward. And the things that I have done with letting it go and letting, the just things that are not within my control, not be able to, I talked about this the last time I believe on our episode 3, how I can just move on from those things. And what is my plan when those things come up? Because it's just amazing how much, when you are under stress for that length of time, how it can truly impact your ability to be able to be creative or to do mental reflection or all of the things that are so absolutely critical. And then you were describing being more negative or focused on the negative aspect of things. Certainly I can see that showing up. So just absolutely fascinating how there's some touch points back to what I've been experiencing. And I imagine that there's a lot of listeners that probably, given what's going on in the political climate or the social climate or whatever, regardless of how we might vote or economically or whatever is going on in their life, they're probably experiencing it or have experienced it. And they can go, oh gosh, that's probably why I was going through that. And the explanation and the model and the understanding just creates relatability to say, this is why that was happening. And then as we go along, we'll be able to share with them some tips to help hopefully pull us out of that state so that they can begin to do something just a little bit differently each day. Very good. Anything else you'd like to share?
Is it worth throwing a couple of tips out right now while we're on the
topic?
topic?
Let's do that.
So, yeah. I think we may have mentioned this one before, but deep breathing. The rate at which you want to deep breathe, again, is slightly personal. Tends to rate between about 10 and 12 breaths for every 2 minutes. 5-6 breaths a minute. Deep breathing actually does help prepare you. Well, first of all, it helps you calm down. Second thing, it helps you to prepare for the next several hours if you can do it for 2 minutes. If you can do it for 10 minutes in the morning, it's one heck of a return on investment, because it actually sets you up better to deal with stress for the next 24 hours. So that's a preventative tool that you can use.
Can we do a quick exercise with our listeners and help them understand? Because maybe someone on this listening doesn't know what deep breathing is, because maybe there's different definitions or explanations for it. Can we do a quick, actually, we don't have to do 2 minutes of it, but we can maybe demonstrate what is deep breathing so that they can be able to practice this on their own after listening to this.
Absolutely. But a word of caution, if you're driving, please don't do this.
Just listen and then practice when you get home.
Exactly.
To a safe space.
So if you breathe in and then slowly breathe out over the next 5 to 6 seconds, and you can just count one. I can't do this and speak at the same time, but it will be 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi, 4 Mississippi, 5 Mississippi, 6 Mississippi. right? That's roughly 5 to 6 seconds. And then you're exhaled and then breathe in again. So you're breathing about 5 to 6 breaths per minute, steadily. And ideally, if you can eliminate all thoughts from your head, and we'll come back to that in a moment. But so what you're doing is just using the interconnection between the lung, the heart, and the brain to actually give you a better ability to deal with stress. And people can go online and they can find deep breathing exercises. As I said, 2 minutes, it's almost, I don't believe that we can't all, just before we go into a meeting, find a way, even if it's going to the bathroom, and sit on the john for 2 minutes and do deep breathing. I'm trying to put it into very practical terms here.
Yeah.
And that's about as practical as I can get.
Right.
2 minutes is really useful. 10 minutes is great. So that's one way. That's a preventative mechanism. Now, I always ask the 3 questions. What can I do to prevent this? What can I do while it's happening? And what can I do to recover? So let's talk about the middle one. I find myself in a meeting and I'm getting stressed. If I can create what's called a circuit breaker. In order to use a circuit breaker, we have to step back a moment. And the idea of a circuit breaker is to give your brain an image, a visual image of something that is comforting, warmth, encouraging, supportive, whatever it might be, of the brain. And so that you can go to it in an instant. It turns out because the brain is 65, 70% visual circuitry, it's the quickest way to actually get the attention of the brain. So if you can come up with that visual image, you think of it as a visual happy place, right? If you can create that, bring it to your mind, that actually it can, not for everybody, but it can act as a circuit breaker, that then you can actually then come back into the world and go, okay, now I'm actually better able to deal with the stress that's occurring right now. So what you need to do is think about that. What is your visual happy place? This is to everyone that's listening. Practice it, about it, and then bring it to mind. Think about it, bring it to mind. Get it so the word is facile. It becomes an easy thing for you to do, to just bring it to mind in an instant. And if you've got pictures of it, put them on your computer. Use them as your screensaver. Put them on the bathroom mirror, whatever it might be. The more you can actually capture that image in the brain, the easier it is to bring it to the fore.
Yep. And now how about recovery?
Similar things. One of the things to do at the afterwards is reflect on what could you have done different. First of all, did you catch yourself for whatever it might be? Second is reflect on what the learning might be. What could you do differently next time? And then, and I forget the guy's name that does positive psychology. He talks a lot about what can you at the end of the day look back on and say, I'm grateful for these 3 things.
Okay, very good. Those are great tips and a great way to help with stress management, because we're all dealing with different levels of stress, whether it's heightened levels of stress or contextually we might be what the actual stress is that we're going through, but how we might be able to prevent it, or then how we might be able to circuit break it in the moment, or then how we might be able to recover from it as we're doing reflection post the stress event. And Phil, one of the things that we described or we talked about earlier is that post-COVID, there seems to be some heightened level of stress for all of us. For some reason, that seems to be the case universally, maybe not for everyone, but overall, it seems to be everyone is experiencing a higher level of stress since COVID happened, which has been now 5 years since that experience occurred. So can you help us understand why that might be happening and give us your perspective on that?
Let's actually go back into the early days of COVID, which, as you said, is 5 years ago. And what was happening is all of a sudden, there's this new thing that we don't know about happening to us. We started to get images from around the world. I think it was China to start with, and then I think it was Italy and all sorts of places. And it was an unknown. The brain hates unknown, right? The brain wants to understand what's going on. And it feels, if it's unknown, it feels like I'm not protected anymore. And in fact, some of the images we got were around people, both far distant from us and loved ones, were dying. That's a direct threat on the protection part of our brain, right? Then we said, okay, you're going to have to stay home. You can't move. No conglomerating, whatever the word is, no getting together with friends and family, right? For those people who are driven by participation, a major threat. If you were a relative introvert and preferred being on your own didn't bother you. But if you were the sort of person that needed other people around you, physically around you, it was very painful. And then finally, prediction. We didn't know what was happening. We didn't know whether this was a 2-month event, a 2-year event, a 20-year event. We had no way of predicting what's going on. So COVID itself threatened all 3 aspects immediately. So now if you go post-COVID and we come out of COVID and now we started into, at least here in America, we started into an election cycle. Right? Let's take a look now at election cycle. And the threats that come up, I'm not being political one side or the other. I have my own opinions. But for this, I'm not being political one side or the other. It doesn't matter which side of the aisle you are, you're going to get threatened at the moment because you don't know what's going to happen. Prediction. We are often in places where we go, I can't talk about my politics here because I'm not in the same in-group as these people over here. And I don't feel protected. I'm going to lose, fill in the blank. And so we are all facing that higher level of total stress that's going on around us.
Right.
There's more and more layoffs occurring or the threat of layoffs. So again, that's party independent. So everybody, doesn't matter which side of the aisle you are, is feeling a higher threat level than we have in the past. So our abilities to manage that stress now, that ability, that skill, that learning, whatever you want to call it, has become more important and more relevant to us lately than it possibly ever was.
And I think one of the things that, as you're talking, that really is resonating with me is the power of, especially for those that are married or that are dating or finding their significant other, or maybe as they've got a really great friend, but specifically in kind of the relational context here, is that if you can create a really good psychologically safe environment with your spouse or with your significant other, the power that comes from having that environment where you may not even have to talk about anything, or maybe you do, obviously people probably see that I'm pretty talkative. I'm on a podcast. Phil, you've known me for quite some time now. I'm usually not at a loss for words. I'm pretty expressive in my ability to talk and talk. You can confirm it. Talk to Joey, my spouse, and he'll certainly tell you the same thing. And maybe you're not someone who talks a lot, but in that psychologically safe environment where you're able to just spend time with your spouse or your significant other, it does, I know for me, allow me the ability to release and relinquish stress. It just dissipates. Especially, obviously, we all have moments with our spouse where things might be stressful or we might be having a disagreement. Those things happen. That's just a natural part of bringing two people together. But in the moments that it's not that way, majority of the time, and you have that psychologically safe space where you're able to truly disconnect from the world, turn off what I call the boob tube or the TV, turn off all your electronic devices and just really spend time with each other. This is another, I think, BrainWise tip to disconnect and spend time with one another. I know for myself, it does help to relieve stress and it helps me to strip away all of those things that are bothering me because that is the person that I'm able to just be myself. I don't have to put on a facade. I don't have to put on any of these other things. And it all just kind of goes away. and allows me to just be at peace and allows me that moment or moments that my brain needs to just relax. And so I think that we oftentimes get so caught up in all the things that are happening and we might take for granted.
That's all true. I would add in last week, I think it was, we talked about how things can become rational or irrational depending on the framing that we put around them. And so one of the ways of helping to recover from a stressful situation is how can I reframe my perspective of what just happened? Especially if you can turn around and say, I learned one thing that doesn't work. Rather than go, oh my gosh, I just failed. I learned another thing. I think it was it Watson that said, yeah, I've learned 7,000 ways not to do it. Reframing it can help us reduce the amount of the stress that we attribute to that particular instant.
Let's pivot to change.
You mean you want to change?
I do a little pun there for everyone.
Thank you.
Let's pivot to change, another of the 5 dynamics of the non-conscious brain. And Phil, we talked a little bit and you shared a little early on that the brain is perhaps a little resistant to change. Why is that the case, even if the change might be a bit more positive or logical in nature?
So let's deal with it change at 2 levels.
Okay.
And that is the change at the brain, I'll call it the physiological level. By that, what's going on actually in the electrochemical side of the brain. There's some things happening there. And then there's one level, if you like, above that, which I'll call the psychological level. Now, don't ask me where the barrier between those two occurs because I can't tell you. But let's, for simplicity's sake at the moment, let's look at the 2 levels. At the lower level, I think we talked about this. We have a concept in the brain, an image. We actually call it a schema in the brain. It's like a model. It's a picture of everything that's around us. I'm looking around my office. There's a picture on the wall. There's the lamp. There's a chair. There's my desk, etc. We have images in the brain about what that is. And when data hits our brain, which aligns with that image, we actually feel like we got it right. And there's a little hit, we call it a dopamine hit. We'll come back to that later, but we actually feel good. By the way, we don't know whether we feel good because we got a dopamine hit or we got a dopamine hit because we feel good. Which came to us, the chicken or the egg, we don't know. But regardless, that's what happens and we feel good about it. Something arrives, it's in line with our expectations. When something is aligned that comes along that's not in line with our expectations, if all of a sudden you showed up with a purple wig on, I'm not suggesting you might, by the way, but if you were,
it would be quite the change.
It would certainly be the change. And my brain would go, wait, what? And I'd get a little negative hit, a little cortisol hit, saying, is this a threat? Is this something that's going on? It's a change, but does it work for me? And so that's what's going on at that level. At the next level up, if you like, we'll talk about what happens at a more psychological level. And that is, there's an old adage in our world called all change is associated with a loss. And if you can identify what the loss is that's associated with the change you're facing, that can be an easier way. Rather than I'm resistant, I don't like change, then what it actually means is loss. And typically there's a number of them that come up, but they're very personal. But in general, it can be a loss of relationship. You mentioned, even though the change may be positive, right? I'm going to give you a promotion, Cole. Great. And the person that you were working with is now working for you. They may no longer be the relationship you had with them last Friday. So the change of relationship, the change of structure. I was used to this, and now I have to go over to this. The change of control. Am I in control of what I'm now doing? Is it something that's new to me? I've got to learn a new piece of software. Now, it may be the greatest thing of software in the world, But for those moments when you're going through the learning curve, you feel like the world's biggest idiot, because simple things become difficult.
Right.
So all of those losses are actually what compound. And if you can identify what they are and what the biggest ones are for you, you can actually turn around and say, I need to address that. And there's another adage that follows that, which is all loss has to be grieved. And so kissing goodbye to something, or having a little celebration of it, or a ceremony around, I don't have that anymore, saying goodbye. And we have a lot of them in our lives. When you got married, it was the end of one relationship and the beginning of another. And we celebrate it with a marriage. We celebrate passages, 21st birthday celebration. There's nothing different, but we celebrate that passage of time. We celebrate other people's death. It's a passage for us all. There's nothing wrong with saying, I'm actually going to have that little celebration for the loss of whatever change came along in my life. That was a long answer to your question.
No, it's perfect. It's interesting to put it and frame it into that context, honestly, Phil, because I think a lot of people, including myself, as they listen to this, they probably don't associate change with loss, but in putting it in that context, it is very true. All change does come with loss. And in psychology, we do talk about loss must be grieved. And if you can really take that kind of positive approach to, okay, as you are going through this change, how can you take a moment to grieve what is being lost? So that way, from a brain perspective, you're giving yourself the time, the moment to be able to do what is necessary to then hopefully be able to manage yourself or navigate or lead yourself through that change, and maybe in a bit more of a positive perspective. So I think it's a great way to really frame what is happening from a brain perspective as we're all experiencing change, even when it may be very positive. And I think it's interesting because others might see changes that we might be going through, and their perspective on it is they see the positive side of it, but they don't see the loss that we are experiencing.
Yep.
And I know that personally because it happened with my spouse. And I don't think he'll mind me talking about this. I won't go into a ton of detail. I'm going through a lot of change professionally. And one of the things that, we had a moment on is he sees, which is one of the things I just absolutely love about him, is the really positive side of everything. And he sees oftentimes the positive before I even see it, which is a beautiful thing. And so he sees the change that I'm going through as that positive, and he sees obviously the abilities and all the things that I bring to the table. But I think the part that, because we're not in the shoes of other people, we aren't able to always see the loss that they're experiencing as the change. And so it reminded me of that. And then probably paired with that, if we are in the shoes of where my spouse was or wherever we might be, is how do we then pair that with empathy in that perspective? And then if we're the one that are experiencing the change, how do we then take a moment to grieve what we might be losing so that we can navigate it more successfully? I think it's a great way to really frame what's happening contextually when we're experiencing change.
And I'll say two other things about change in general. One is, so I come along to you and I say, okay, Cole, you've just got a promotion and you're going to be fill in the blank. And that starts in 2 weeks' time. 2 weeks' time, you show up at work, but you haven't changed. The things that are required of you have changed. So what I like to distinguish between is the change, and the change happened when your boss called you in and said, I've given you a promotion. Then you go through a transition. You don't have the new context until it may be 3, 4, 5 months later. You're actually in a comfort zone in the new context. So there's the difference to think about in terms of, is this a change, or am I about to enter into transition? And the first period of time in transitions is often a difficult period. We feel like we're at a loss. We're at a loss of what the heck do I do? We feel like maybe we're not making any progress. Some people refer to it as walking through molasses. Some people have talked about it as the tar pit. We actually call it the neutral zone. You're not in your old place, and you're not quite yet in the new place. It can sometimes, depending on your own personality, it can be a scary place to be. And outsiders see it as, hey, look at the pathway you're on, all the positives. But actually, what you experience as you're going through that neutral zone can be a little scary. The other thing is when we're assisting other people going through change, we, especially as males, but in the Western world, we're trained to come up with answers. And we want to tend to give that other person advice. Yeah. And that's a fallacy for a number of reasons. Number one is we're often not very good at giving advice. We use a hammer and a nail technique. And number two is we give advice about what we would do rather than what would be optimum for the other person. Right? Mm-hmm. And number three is that we tend to not fully be able to put ourselves in those person's footsteps. So the best thing to be in, if somebody's going through change, is to be there in support and maybe turn it around and ask them what help they need.
Right. How can I support you?
How can I support you? What can I best do? How can I give assistance? And quite often we get, no, you don't need to do anything. You don't, and especially, I don't need your advice right now. Mm-hmm. The worst thing this is personal, but I think it applies to a lot of listeners, when people turn around and say, what you should do. And a friend of mine once said to me, you don't should on me and I won't should on you.
Exactly. I like that a lot.
So,
that's good.
Anyway, that's some things about change, and hopefully that's relatively easy to put into practice, those ideas.
I think it takes practice to be able to do it, especially the advice, we call it the advice monster. Yeah. In coaching, it just comes out so naturally for a lot of people, males especially, but even for females or for women, it certainly comes out for a lot of them naturally too. It's just a natural inclination. And I think a lot of it is, it's not ill-intentioned. It's just the natural part. We want to help. We want to solve it because we want to take away the pain, or we want to take away the challenge, or you want to take away whatever it is the other person is experiencing. And the reality is we can't take it away. We can only be there in support of what they're going through. And that's oftentimes all that they need.
Yeah.
Is they just need us to be there to support them, recognize that they are experiencing something emotionally, and just be there for them as they're experiencing those emotions. And then I think the most powerful thing that we've probably said about change so far is, in terms of supporting someone else, is what you described is, how can I support you through this change?
Yeah. And there's a whole bunch of research done on, if you like it, I'll call it the ultimate change, is when people are about to die. And they were interviewed about what they were asked about. How can you be, what do you need, and things like that. And majority of them turn around and said, I don't need advice. I don't need help. I need someone to be there. Somebody to support me and just be present with me. And so if you take that as a basis.
Yep.
I'll give you another example from many years ago. There was a young little boy in my environment, and he fell over and obviously hurt himself. And I said to the lady, I'll go up and pick him up. And she said, hold it. Great to go over there. He knows you're there. Then ask him what he wants. Oh, never thought of that before. Major learning in my life.
Interesting.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Very interesting. One more thing I want to talk about on change, Phil, before we transition over to doing a brief discussion on rhythms, is we oftentimes talk about that some people seem to handle change better. There's early adopters, there's innovators, there's the change curve. And it's interesting because I personally have always been a pretty early adopter, or maybe even somewhat innovate in terms of going out and seeking change outside of perhaps when it's a fairly emotional experience around something. But I'm curious, from your perspective, why is it that there seems to be that some people are, even though we all have a brain, we have brains, and maybe the answer is we're just different as human beings, but that some people are able to maybe go and be innovators or be earlier adopters of change, and then some they take a little bit longer to get there. What drives that difference, if there is an explanation for it?
I'm not sure. That was the basis of my master's thesis, is, and the background was, if a manager has received legitimate feedback, what are the aspects that will cause him or her to change as a result of that feedback? And the sad thing is, I couldn't find those aspects. There were some things I found which were contributors, but I was never able to answer the question. So we do know is that genetics probably has a lot to do with it. Some people say as much as 38% of your ability to take those type of things is based on your genetics. We know that, for example, kids when immediately demonstrate whether they are comfort in exploring new things or they're neurotic about exploring new things. So that shows up fairly early on. So part of it is your background, part of it is your experience to date. When you've been involved in things that are around change, has it been successful and pleasant, or has it been unpleasant? Those are going to have impact on you. Your poverty levels growing up have another impact. All sorts of things have those impact in building up that worldview. And then finally, your current situation. What's going on right now for you? You may have been able to do change very well in the past, but if all of a sudden you've just been told you've got a chronic illness, you not probably want to be facing change right now. So all sorts of things. What we do know is that in those different change curves, you call it, whether you're a pioneer or an early adopter or any of those, right the way through to the laggards who never want to change, there are different things that are being driven at that point. For pioneers, the early adoption is around achieving a dream. So if you tend to be future-oriented, vision-oriented, and those type of things, you're more likely to adopt the changes that take you a step towards your dream. Whereas those people who are slower in adopting things probably are not oriented. Those are not important things to them in their lives. And therefore, what's important to them in their lives is things like being right, being socially accepted, doing what everybody else is doing. They're driven by different things. So again, if you can find out what drives you, and more maybe as important, what drives the people that are around you, then you can help them go through the change that way.
Interesting.
The other thing is we do have a model of change, and we're not going to go into it in detail today because I think that's going to become the subject of one of our future podcasts. But I think we said early on, the difference between a novice and an expert is a model. So if we can help people become experts on their own change by giving them a model, then that helps as well.
Absolutely. And as you were just describing it, I think when we introduce that model, I think we can also go into a bit of what you were just describing around how do we help people navigate themselves through change, navigate others through change, navigate their team and their organizations through change, maybe even their families, and give them some really practical exercises to do.
Look forward to that one.
Yeah, that'll be really fun, especially as the world just continues to evolve, probably at an even more rapid pace with the introduction of AI and generative AI specifically. Phil, let's transition to rhythms and briefly talk. We've talked a little bit about it and gone through them, but I think it's important knowing it's the last of the 5 dynamics of the non-conscious brain or part of the brain. And so can you give us just a quick, what are the different rhythms of the brain, and then how do they impact performance and our mood?
Yeah, I think we probably, there's no take 2. Let's go back, and I think we had the summary that there's 4 rhythms that impact our brain, and they range from monthly rhythms, easy for me to say, through to, I don't want to say minute to minute, but hourly rhythms. And they are so basically monthly rhythm, more obvious, tends to be more obvious in females than males, but there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that we're all impacted by monthly rhythms. Let's assume we are, but that's a sort of general thing. When's the best time for you to start engaging in elected change? That's, that might be the sort of way to actually put it into a decode of practical application. But now let's go down to the daily. The daily rhythms are essentially twofold. One is when during the day that you do your best work. And there tends to be 2. We call them owls, those people that do their best work late at night, versus larks that do their best work first thing in the morning. Finding out when you do your best work is important. And what I'm actually finding now, more and more people, it's not a one and done. I'm actually finding that when I was much younger, I was an owl. Sorry, I was a lark. And then as I grew older and older, I took on more lark tendencies. Now I now find 2 or 3 hours of work in the morning is my most productive space. I'm writing a book at the moment, and yesterday I did 5,500 words in 2.5 hours. It just flowed out. So, so understanding not only what your general tendencies are, but what's working for you right now. I think that's an important thing. So the owl and lark thing, and some of us don't show tendencies in any one particular direction. And that's middle of the day, that's their best time. Second thing is what we call circadian rhythms. And I think we went through that, but just as a reminder, it's when you wake up, you get more and more lively, and that liveliness, if you like, increases to about midday. And then you start going downhill. Some people get a second wind at about 3 or 4 o'clock, and then it winds down. And that happens on a regular basis. It's one of the main reasons that circadian rhythm is one of the reasons why jet lag is so difficult to deal with. When you fly across you're imagining a wonderful experience. You're going to fly into Rome. You've got 3 days in Rome, and you're going to see all the sights. But when you get there, at their 9 o'clock in the morning, it's 5 o'clock in the evening for you, or whatever it might be, the other way around, and you're just not feeling energetic enough to go out. It's because your body rhythms aren't adapted to those change. On average, jet lag requires about a day for every hour change difference. So to get into the full swing of things and feel fully up to speed, you've got to allow yourself for that. So that's a practical impact of circadian rhythms. Likewise, if you're on night shift and day shift, again, you're being forced to wake up, stay awake for periods of time when your body goes, no, I need to be asleep right now. And so that's some practical applications there. And then the last thing is we're subject to a 90-minute rhythm, roughly. So we go energetic and then down about every 90 minutes. It demonstrates itself through REM sleep, but it keeps going through the day. So from a practical application of that is at any given time, you've probably got about 45 minutes max when you can do your best work, right? So the best thing to do is see if you can if you can coordinate, great. For many people, this little rule of thumb is it used to be you do 45 minutes of work and then put on one side of a record album, which was about 20 minutes, and then go back again. You could do 45 minutes of work, another 20 minutes of record album. I don't know whether that applies anymore, but some idea is just break your day up into periods of time when you can let your brain go loose and then work hard. Let your brain go loose and work hard. And there's been a lot of research on taking those 20-minute interrupts around that, what's called an ultradian rhythm, can help significantly.
Because you're not going to be as productive if you just continue to work anyways.
Not at all.
And if you take that time to take a break and let your brain have a relaxing moment, you'll be even more productive in the next 45 minutes than if you hadn't. And so you're going to get more work completed than if you hadn't taken the break. So it's actually a good return on investment of taking that time. And one of the things that if you're not wanting to listen to music, I think another one is to get up and maybe go for a walk outside for 15 minutes.
Absolutely. You remember the purpose of the brain, or how the brain evolved, was outside, on the move, under constantly changing conditions. So if you want to just change your brain around, go out, especially outside. And there is a lot of research that says if you can go outside into nature and trees, that's better than going outside and walking around on a concrete floor. So, yeah. And if you go outside, go for a walk, and then come back in, do your 2 minutes of deep breathing, now you're starting to actually operate in a BrainWise fashion.
Absolutely. And you'll be well equipped to handle what's going to come next. So, Phil, one of the things as we wrap up the rhythms discussion, in a world that does value hustle and output, we just gave them one of the tips around doing 45 minutes of work and then the 20 minutes. But how do we make room for honoring the brain's natural rhythms in a world that does value hustle and output? We were talking earlier about a lot of us check our phones first thing in the morning and do email, or we maybe do the most terrible thing that we don't like first thing in the morning, and how that might not be a good thing. Can you help us understand how do we honor the brain's natural rhythms in a world where it may not be encouraged to do, or we feel that it's not encouraged to do?
A couple of things. First of all, if you can honor the main rhythms, first of all, are you an owl or are you a lark? So therefore, if you're going to get up early in the morning, and we have a tendency to be driven by other people. And so all of a sudden we wake up in the morning, whether it be 6:30 or 7 or 5, whatever time you wake up, but instantly, especially society has driven us to be driven by this damn thing, right? Worst thing in the world that happened to the brain, right? No, I'm exaggerating. But if you can avoid the temptation to go straight into answering email, but it's probably that first couple of hours is the most, what word do I want to use? Valuable time, personal valuable time for you as an individual. And use it for you, not be driven by other people. And therefore, if you've got a pet project you're working on, or I've got a colleague who basically takes the first hour and a half to 2 hours, he either paints or he writes or he learns French first thing in the morning. What's going to be valuable for your growth and enlightened self-interest? To heck with the rest of the world. It's yours. It's the most productive time you can have. It's the most creative time you can have. And so if you like blowing it on email, or you get in at 8 o'clock in the morning and you have your staff meeting at that point in time, you're doing routine process work, it's not using the best time for your brain. So that's one thing. Optimize the time, both at the hour-to-hour level, the day-to-day level, your overall tendencies, and be driven by your needs. You may not have control. If you're a nurse in a hospital, you're driven by other people. But if you're working at home, put the 1 hour in the middle of 11 o'clock to 12 o'clock, whatever it might be. You're going to turn around and say, no, this is my time. I'm going to block myself out for every other day from 11 to 12. And that's the time I'm going to work on the creative thing I have to do or the biggest problem I have to face. Second thing is, and you alluded to this, is, again, societally has driven us to, especially in certain ways that people were brought up, hey, deal with the tough stuff first. Be a man. Deal with the tough stuff first. And you then get to do the better stuff later. From a brain perspective, that's actually the worst thing you can do. Because if you're putting yourself into dealing with the difficult, unpleasant, I don't want to do that type of stuff, your brain is going into a stress mode. And then you give yourself a reward at the end, and all you do is you bring yourself back up to zero. If you flip those from a brain perspective, if you do the stuff that you enjoy first, you actually feel good. You get some dopamine going in the brain, and you feel like you've got a bit more energy to then actually turn to those more difficult tasks. Societal driven versus brain driven are probably at opposite ends of the spectrum.
And some people do the worst thing first, or the most hard thing, or the thing you dislike the most first. Some people may just not do it at all, meaning that then they'd end up not doing any of the things that they like or the thing that they don't want to do because they're being driven by that. So they just avoid it entirely. Whereas if they just flip the narrative, they might actually get some things done that they would like to do and then have some energy or some reserves in their tank to be able to then do some things that maybe they aren't their most pleasant tasks, but they have reserves to go and do them.
Yeah. And the other thing is, and I find this so often when I'm coaching people and we start talking about what their longer term goals are, I never get round to them because I'm driven by short term, got to get it done type of things. Maybe what you do is you take a half an hour sometime between 7 and 7:30 and say, that's the time I'm going to focus on something that leads me towards a longer term goal.
Phil, we've shared a lot today on stress, change, and rhythms, the final 3 of the 5 non-conscious dynamics of the brain. And we've gone through a lot of information. And so I've got some self-reflection questions to help our listeners. I do have one thing I'd like to share. We're sharing all of these practical tips. And in context, as we share them out loud, it probably sounds, oh yeah, that sounds so easy, or oh, it's easy for them to say. It probably sounds easy as we describe it, but it is difficult sometimes. And we recognize that it is not always the easiest thing to do all of these things. And what we're doing is we're giving a multitude of different practical exercises because not all of them are going to resonate with each person. One might resonate with you more than another, which is why we might have multiple reflection questions, because one might resonate with you more than someone else who's listening. And as you are hearing these things, certainly don't feel though as if you have to do all of these things, but what's one of the things that, as we describe through each of the different episodes, that you can apply and practice and continue to do over the course of the next several weeks to help you continue to decode your life and live in a very BrainWise fashion? Because that is the ultimate goal as you continue to take, really, it's about taking small steps to get to the journey and to the goals that it is that you would like to achieve in your life. So I just wanted to add that, Phil, because there's a lot that we're sharing, and I just wanted them to really be reassured that it's just for context to apply to everyone who might be listening. But how would you like to summarize what we've talked about today, Phil, and how can it help them to really decode their life?
So I'm glad you mentioned that because I'll build on that at the moment. But one of the things what we're trying to do, I think we mentioned this at the beginning, but if we can give everybody a model, and so they can become an expert on themselves. Become an expert on yourself before you can become an expert on somebody else. And so become an expert on you. And what we're doing is giving lots of different models. I always think of it as an old-fashioned carpenter. And you look behind the bench of an old-fashioned carpenter, you're going to see 50, 60, 70 tools on the wall, all hanging there ready for use. Selecting each of these models we're giving you is a tool. And some carpenters have a favorite tool that they always go to, but it's not always useful in a given context. So we're giving you a series of tools for you to use. And as Cole just said, not every tool is going to work for you. And by no means are we expecting everyone to use every tool. Pull the ones out. The first thing I remember when I went to do my first lecture in computer science many years ago, more years ago than I'm going to admit. The professor was sitting there and he said, I'm going to give you the 2 things you need to know in order to pass this class. And all of us get our pens out ready to write. We didn't have iPads in those days. And he said, where to look and who to ask. Those were the 2 things. And I think now what we're doing is providing a third thing is, which model are you going to use? And just identifying all those models. And I'll give you one practical example. There was a company I was working with 15 years ago, and they identified their credo, and it was 23 bullet points. They were wonderful, happy to share them with the world if they want to know. And they were building a new building, and they put these 23 credo bullet points on the outside wall. And one day a woman came in and said, you've changed my life. And the manager of the company said, how so, ma'am? She said, I walk past and I pick one of those each day. I phone my husband up and say, this is what we're going to work on today. And so there's an example there. What one of these models, what one of these ideas or concepts we have, what one do you want to work on today? And that will move you forward over a period of time.
Absolutely. Phil, how can the information that we've shared today or the models that we've shared today around stress, change, and rhythms help the listeners decode their life? Or how has it helped you decode your life?
So I'll talk to them, to our listeners, and that is pick one of these things we've talked about. Pick a best time of the day. Pick a 2-minute window when you are going to commit to deep breathing. Commit to 20 minutes when you decide that you're going to go out for a walk. Any of those things, pick any one of them, and it will actually move you towards something else.
Yeah. And I think for myself, how it's helped decode my life, specifically when I think of the part around change and how we navigate through change, and how myself, as we were just describing around the loss and grieving change, it is really important because I've been going through a significant amount of change. And so I have been taking time to grieve the loss that I've been experiencing. And there's several different things. There's several different losses in this change in particular that I'm experiencing. And so I have been acknowledging that, and I've been giving myself the space and the grace to be able to do so, while then also focusing on what is the positive of the change, which has actually allowed my brain and my physical experience to then shift to the positive narrative, which has been really exciting to see and help me begin to really focus on the passion and the future of what is going, as what is coming next in my professional life. And so I think that as you begin to think about what's going on in your life, if there is some significant change, take the moment to be able to say, what is the loss that I'm experiencing as a result of this change? And then allow yourself a moment to grieve. Is it the celebrate? Do you need to celebrate something? Is it you need to be able to say goodbye to something? Is it whatever it might be? Give yourself the grace in the moment to be able to do that, because it will allow you the opportunity to then shift your perspective as you begin to navigate forward. And so there's a few reflection questions as you reflect on the episode today. And by no means do you have to reflect on all of them, but pick one or two that you think might most relate to what you've been going through or that most impact you. And so the first one is, where in your life right now are you operating outside your optimal stress zone? Are you understimulated, overextended, or just stretched in the wrong direction? What schema or mental rules might be shaping how you react to change, and are those rules still serving you? What time of day are you naturally most clear-headed, focused, or connected, and how could you protect that time more intentionally? What's one low-grade stressor that you've accepted as normal but might be quietly pulling you off your curve? Think about habits, people, meetings, environments. And then how would your leadership or relationships change if you aligned your actions to your brain's rhythms, not your calendar's demands? So, Phil, with that, what else would you like to share with our listeners?
So I'm going to share a story. And as it was told to me, it was coming from Native American Indian. And I don't know whether this is a true story or apocryphal. So let's put it in that. But it's a very good metaphor, I think. And that is the Indian warrior fashions a new bow and arrow. And it's never been designed this way before. And the buffalo herd comes through. And for the first time ever, the use of this arrow can kill enough buffalo that actually provides for the whole tribe for the winter. And so there's a major celebration. It's a big change for the organization, for the tribe. And in the midst of the celebration, this warrior is asked what he's going to do next with this bow and arrow. And he said, it's done its best work. And he walks over to a young man that's standing there who's 16 years old. And he says, here, this is for you. That's the story. And I'll step back for a moment. And that is, most of us, when we go through an achievement or a change, we're going to move on. And there is something that represents that past that anchors you backwards. Give that thing away to somebody that deserves it right now.
That's very powerful. Thank you, Phil. And thank you, listeners, for joining us for episode 4 of BrainWise, Our Lives Decoded. It's been an excellent episode, and we appreciate you tuning in. As always, if you have questions or would like to share stories or just want to get to know us better, we have our email, which is questions@mybrainwisecoach.com. If it's something that we can share publicly, let us know in your email. If it's something you would like to remain private, please indicate that as well. Again, the email is questions@mybrainwisecoach.com, and we'll see you next week.